we introduce ourselves and kind of give an overview of where we're going, can we just get a quick sense, has anyone here gone through like any emergency preparedness, CERT training or anything of that nature? A couple homies over here, a little bit. And then is anyone here like a part of a local resilience building, like intentional community or transition town or anything like that? Okay. Okay. And then one other hands up thing is like, okay, if you feel like an emergency were to happen, say now or like when we got home tomorrow, like last year the fires happened the day after the convergence, which was crazy. We were like up all night tending the fire here and having our sacred wildfire, our sacred campfire, and then the next day this wildfire happened. But if the disaster happened today or tomorrow, like one hand if you're kind of ready, two hands if you're like I'm ready for this, zero hands if not ready at all. Ooh, we got a two-hander up there. I'm like a one and a quarter. All right, cool. All right, yeah. Well, we'll introduce ourselves and kind of give an overview of where we're going. There's a training involved today, so we're going to give like some nuggets of actual training. We got a go bag that we can take out and play with. But Lesley, you want to start off with who you are and how you came to the work?
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Lesley Moore, and Nils and I have co-presented this now a couple times in a few different settings. And I am a writer and an educator and an artist, and lived and worked in an eco-village for a while, and do a lot of fundraising and grant writing for nonprofits. And I think, backpacking with my family, and then also as a kid, and hiking, and just that experience of being more resilient and going, off-grid for whatever, 4 or 5 days at a time. And then also a family house fire, which was, I think, kind of traumatic when I was a kid. Really made an impression on me. And I was a theater stage manager, so I've been carrying a gas masks since, or an N95 mask since the fires last year. So certain things people do, and I just added some to mine. And so when I heard about the CERT training, which is most fire departments offer it, I did that in Oakland and then Berkeley, and now I'm going to do it in Albany, all in the Bay Area. And I did my permaculture certificate a few years ago, and am really interested in bringing, integrating some of those different things I mentioned in service of emergency preparedness and more resilient communities, whatever that we know that to mean. Yeah.
My name's Nils Palsson. I work with Dawn at Transition US, where I'm communications coordinator. I also live in Santa Rosa, so I was impacted by the wildfires last year. And actually, a few years back, I was living over in Lake County, so right over these hills this way. And I had been a local grassroots transition town organizer, doing a lot of work in community. It's on social permaculture projects relating to local access to healthy food and local energy and alternative economy and all of these things. And that's when my daughter was born, on an eco-village we were working on in Lake County, and everything was, kind of grooving along until this huge fire happened 3 years ago now, the Valley Fire, and it came right up in my community. In fact, it was a matter of minutes from on a windy September afternoon to looking out sort of into the woods and seeing, oh, there's a big plume of smoke over there, to 10 minutes later, oh, there's an advancing wall of fire. It's getting very close. We must do something right now. And there was no evacuation notice sounded. It was just the tribe sort of springing into action. And I had an experience of driving initially toward the fire because I had a text from a buddy with no car that needed a ride, and scooping him and his little dog up, and then swooping by my house because there was just enough time to grab my box of essential writings and my guitar while I was at it. Thankfully, my daughter was traveling with her mom in Ohio, so I didn't have to, that wasn't there. I was able to just be with the community. We got down to a safe place, and I'm sort of sharing a little bit of the Valley Fire story here. We got down to a safe place away from the fire, down in the town of Kelseyville, and turned on the local radio, and a rerun was playing of a reggae program. And this was a radio station where I had my own radio program, so me and my buddies had keys to the station, and we ended up going to the radio station and initiating 24/7 sort of broadcast of what was going on during the fire. Then it ended up being covered in international media, and it was interesting. This whole Valley Fire experience, what unfolded over the next few weeks, was a reminder that the work that we had been doing in transition and in our social permaculture, our work of growing resilient community, we didn't think of it at the time as emergency preparedness. I don't think anyone was really like thinking that a big fire was going to happen. But that work that we'd done over years of building, local time banks and community garden cooperatives and things like that, that prepared us much more than I could have ever expected. But it was also more than anyone was ready for. Like there's a saying that preparation is best done in advance, and like we were not that prepared. Like when the fire was happening, we were out there in the driveways, like getting each other's phone numbers, with our neighbors. We didn't know our neighbors' phone numbers. I didn't have a go bag at the time. I had never been CERT trained. Since then, I have been CERT trained by a local fire department. I am the guy who's got a first aid kit in my trunk, and like a rope and a knife and a flashlight and whatever you need. And part of the intention here, I mean, just by being in this circle, it doesn't have to be like, I'm very much like not fear-based at all. Like this is the way to be of service. If the unexpected ever happens, earthquake, weather, anything, someone getting hurt in a car accident on the road, and you're able to be of service. So being able to be of service is the purpose of it all. But just by coming here for an hour, the magic is happening. So like whether you take this, and it would be awesome if somehow at the end of this you're inspired to like, oh, I want to have a go bag in my car, or like at least like somewhere in my house where if shit goes down, like I can grab my bag and go. Awesome. If you're like, I want to dig deep, like, can I get a training with my local fire department? You probably can. They probably do offer like CERT trainings a couple times a year, where you go in for a weekend, or go in for a few weeknights, a month. That's awesome. Or even if you just are here for 5 minutes and then leave, and something is sparked in your brain to make you somehow, or in your heart, to make you somehow more of service in any situation, then my intention will be fulfilled for this circle today. So, and I think the flow, and you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, we've done this in various like longer iterations, and this is the shortest. We're trying to cram it into an hour. I think the flow is generally to share some actual, we've both been through CERT trainings with fire departments, and like we're both first aid, CPR, all that trained. So we want to give like a mini training that would take maybe half an hour, and then also give time to just sort of riff on the themes that you guys touched on. And I also want to invite that this be a sort of an open circle, that if at any point you want to bring something in and share it, feel free to just speak on up or contribute yourself.
Yes.
I have an opening question.
Did you?
You strike me as a fairly like socially connected human, like in your communities that you've lived in. And I'm wondering, in reflecting on like what was it that had stopped you from asking for your neighbors' numbers, or what had inhibited you in the social setting of like even in an eco village.
Well, that wasn't in an eco village.
Yeah,
that happened.
yeah. But you get what I'm saying. I'm just curious. And yeah.
I think just a lack of foresight. Like it hadn't quite dawned on me, especially if you're just living next to someone. You're used to saying what's up to them, but not necessarily like, being patched in. And I mean, in this fire in Lake County, which before the Tubbs fire and then the Mendocino complex fire that happened here in the last year, the one in Lake County was at the time the most destructive wildfire in California history. And when that happened, I don't know. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. It's like that triggered me on this journey to be getting ready. The loss of life during that Lake County fire was a couple of homebound seniors basically. So it's not just knowing who's next to us, but like who lives in our wider neighborhood, and finding ways to actually map our neighborhood and map who lives where and where the most vulnerable people are.
So one of the things I've been doing over the last year, actually, with a Transition US's initiative or initiation, is writing a emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness handbook for neighbors that's got two main parts. This is kind of a missing piece. putting your own oxygen mask on first, so getting yourself ready first, your household ready first, and then working to make a neighbor plan, like we were just discussing. And the idea is that you could do all of that together, right? Because what are all these things that are kind of holding us back, right? A lot of people are like, it's time, or it's like, so similar to another program that Transition US has called Transition Streets, where folks get together and do some of these sustainability actions from kind of low-hanging fruit, on up in the area of water and food and housing and energy. The same idea is that neighbors can get together and like put the go bags together and learn how to do the utility shut off together, and even work on, they're each going to do their individual household plan, but they can kind of compare notes and like egg each other on, right? Okay, next week is so you'd meet as like a group. And then you do part 2, which is organizing at a neighborhood level. And that is a little bit what Nils was mentioning. There's actually a branded program now called Map Your Neighborhood. And it's pretty good for those of you that have done CERT or are considering doing CERT. It's starting to be adopted by fire departments. It was actually created in the Bay and then really formalized in Washington State, where they're doing a lot of preparation and for the big one. And it's very efficient in getting neighbors together, having them go through a one workshop session where they do these prep steps together and then come together after most likely an earthquake. So similar idea. And I think that I feel like, you all could teach it, right? Because you said, I think, really important things. And I just wanted to touch on a couple that I think are very much there's so many different angles, but, one is really off-grid living and doing it now, living that way now, so that it's not suddenly you're going to implement all these new systems, right? Like, dealing with waste, human waste, in quotes, is a major consideration. As a matter of fact, as I've learned more about disaster first aid, I've learned that sanitation and hygiene is a major concern in mass disasters. So that really matters. So how are we going to suddenly implement a composting toilet system when we never knew how to do that before? We want to already be having, right, stacked functions and redundancy in lots of vital areas. And then just like the need to deal, someone mentioned, right? The distinction between chaos, the possible of chaos and clarity. And someone that I reference a lot and really recommend and hold up in center is Rebecca Solnit, particularly her book, A Paradise Built in Hell. She did extensive research, so it's all documented from the San Francisco earthquake right up to Katrina, that there's a certain dominant narrative that the media loves and other people loves about, but there's actually just as much cooperation as there is competition, right? It's kind of that similar, some of these dominant narratives that need to be totally called out and questioned. And so she shows time and again that people rise to the occasion and cooperate. Well, what if we could do a little preparation, right? We'd be all that much more to the good to build on that. And just one final thing, in doing this research, I've also looked internationally. I looked particularly at Japan, and then also there is an international disaster preparedness space or movement. And they're kind of ahead of us, right? Because again, there's this feeling like we're not on top of it as a nation or locally or regionally. And someone said something about the distinction between prevention and preparedness. And there's this studiers of disasters say that there's it can be prevented, right? It's not a natural disaster. That's a natural occurrence. The disaster happened because of your actions or inactions, and that that much of what we encounter that causes serious injury or death and a lot of suffering could be minimized. And so getting into that psychological mindset as well, right? I think that's probably the single most important thing. One of the sayings, it's a Theodore Roosevelt saying, do what you can with what you have and the time you have where you are. I think I just transposed that, but you may not have a go bag with you, right? You may not be where you normally are. You may be traveling and be in another area when something happens. So the idea of just starting to have a general readiness awareness, like, did your mom, right, when you were growing up, look for the exits whenever you were in a movie theater? My mom told me to do that. So that same kind of orientation in life. You're going to a new area. What do I need to know about this area that might be a little bit different? So yeah, I think that idea of the steps that we can take to prepare, being a lot of that being mental preparation and resilience, is pretty key. Because our physical preparations may or may not come into play. They, though, even if they don't, even if you made the bag or whatever and then you don't have it or whatever, the process of having done that gives you peace of mind, right? That's one important part of this, I think, is to take some steps, some reasonable steps to kind of adjust to the new normal. And then you also still know so much more, so that even if you're improvising, you know about some of the things that you want to be kind of improvising with or for, because you've thought about what are the essential things I need to have with me, or have thought through some of that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, that's good. I mean, I think maybe we cruise through some of these initial training topics and then play with the philosophies. But yeah, I guess just that there's space for permaculture and this holistic design to actually transform the way we do emergency preparedness to begin with. Like the waste thing that you were mentioning, like the way that FEMA recommends dealing with waste is like poop it in plastic bags and put it in a bucket and then like stack the buckets up over there somewhere. So it's not like a very like permaculture-y holistic way of doing things. And like just by being in a place like this and using the communal kitchen and participating in community structures like this that are based on a holistic perspective, is we can actually transform preparedness. And then of course like all the sort of militaristic ways of dealing with these emergencies of like supply drops and bringing in pallets of water bottles and stuff, like I guess it's great, like when we were going through the Valley Fire, like people in the adjacent counties were able to send over truckloads of supplies, which is thanks. And also, like, what if the truck isn't able to come over the hill? Like, what can we actually do where we are with what we've got?
And we're more vulnerable, just to pick up on that, because I think that's a major theme. I mentioned mental preparation at an individual level, but really the title of our workshop is at a community level, right? That we're building these community relationships. And the more that we have, again, that interconnected web that's already got strength, that's already been built and is in place before the disaster happens, the more we can be a ecological and ethical antidote to this top-down, hierarchical, militaristic, because you do learn in CERT. There is this incident command system. So it's good to learn it, to know their language, to know, and the fire department is awesome. That's who you train with. I highly recommend it. But they're plugged into a larger system that involves the Department of Homeland Security and these other. So if we can build cooperative, horizontal, organized systems that are already in place, that will, again, really help us in response to that very heavy kind of top-down. We can have something else going on already.
And it does, for my part, it does help to have that bridge built to those communities.
Absolutely.
The fire departments and all of that. Like, there is a lot of basics to be aware of, even if we're going to like transform it and flip the script and do it in a total, permaculture holistic way. But to know basics of fire suppression, in case there's ever a fire you need to like put out, or to know the basics of search and rescue. Like, they've been practicing it and doing it for a long time, and there are some, helpful strategies. Or first aid, like literally how to treat a wound and stop someone from bleeding out. And then some of the things we're going to cover right now, like situational awareness and, just taking care of ourselves so we're not the person that's bleeding out. Just like simple things like, okay, know where a pair of shoes are. Like, if the emergency, earthquake, fire, whatever happens, most of the injuries are actually from people getting cut by debris more than anything else. So it's like, before running out into the street, put on some shoes. If you're running out into the night, hopefully you've got like a hoodie to grab and some long pants. Maybe that you're gonna be wearing what you got on for the next 3 days. Like, so some of these like very, very basic personal things. So I don't know, are you down to sort of jump into situational awareness
Sure.
and
Yep.
personal preparedness? And we'll give like a super quick overview of some of these fire suppression first aid things, and with the hope that you'll go do at the least do a first aid training, if not a full cert training. Yeah.
Cool. So, right. So, something happens, right? Do you even know what it is? What just happened, right? Was it earthquake? Was it an explosion? Was it so? Doing a size up, you may need to react, in a split second. But if you can take the time to assess what happened. I think for earthquakes, right, they stay inside. I know the instinct is to run out. These tips we're giving you really are like the top ones culled from all the tip givers. So in earthquake country, keep under your bed shoes, flashlight, and be able to get dressed in long sleeves and pants, totally again to protect yourself from cuts to go out. If you do the Map Your Neighborhood program, they want you to put that sheet of paper with everybody's names and addresses under there. And they're hoping that some people will be able to be home and be able to grab it and go out and go get into action. And then doing a size up, right? Trying to get a sense of what happened, looking for those hazards. Again, trying to not to kind of prematurely act. You'll first need to tend to your loved ones and yourself before you can go out and help others. So do that, whatever that might mean. And then if you've done Map Your Neighborhood program, you'll have a little bit more of a structure to plug into in your neighborhood. If you haven't, you'll still be running out to help each other and improvise. A couple general rules. One is slow is pro, so really taking it slow. And another is always having a buddy, working with a buddy. So if you're going to go, so no kind of like solo hero stuff. The fire department really asks that so that you don't become another injured. You've just gone from being a helper to another injured person.
Right.
So we both learned in CERT to do light search and rescue, to do fire suppression, to do disaster first aid, and those first two you would always do with another person. Actually, even a third person is good. And so be aware of things like once you do where you have stored your bug out bag. And another thing that fire departments are pushing more and more is to learn, at least in earthquake country, is to learn how to, or actually this is true for other types of disasters, how and when and where to turn off your utilities. So you probably know water and electric, but you may not know gas. Because normally you don't want to shut it off. You can't practice it because only the gas company can turn it back on. So most of them go 1/4. It needs to line up to be on, right? So the gas is going like that. But when you turn it like that, it shuts it off. But some models might be different, so you need to check yours. And then they recommend have that wrench either in your bag or near the utility.
Yeah, just keep it right near the shut off.
In the Map Your Neighborhood program, you would all learn where each other's are. So what's really nice is the Map Your Neighborhood program is starting to get really co-op-y. They're like, let each other, because it's the level of trust. If you know you can share tools. We've talked with neighbors who you can go in case of emergency, you can go into my garage and borrow my tools. This is where extra supplies are. Some neighbors are buying supplies together. Yes?
Can you say the name of that a little slower? The project?
The Map Your Neighborhood. When you go out, be really aware of down power lines. I know that gets mentioned in every disaster, and I am really scared I'm going to go running right into one. So I think, again, it's one of those things just to keep hearing over and over again, to be aware of down power lines. And then we know about water, right, to not be in standing water, or to not go into water that we don't know how deep it is, or the toxins that could be in there, or the possibility of electrocution. We talked about the Rebecca Solnit earlier, and community building really as a key strategy, building trust, building relationships. Luck favors the prepared. And then really thinking, also using a permaculture design approach, I think totally is appropriate, grounded in observation, assessment, vision, making a design. And then thinking about what skills do you want to bring and what do you want to develop. So I think we touched on some different areas here, but really thinking about, I've started figuring out, I feel like I can provide support to people that maybe are having stress, and I'm I find myself stockpiling first aid supplies. So that's what I'm feeling. So, and I actually read those are great to barter. You know, the amount of gauze that one wound will go through is a lot. So, and maybe that's not you at all. I think it's important that we're in a really material culture. So I think also for people who are on limited income, many people in the U.S. who don't have money to put together a go bag at all, you know, we really want to be talking also about these important skills as well.
And I know Lesley said this already a minute ago, but I want to emphasize the slow is pro bit. Like, I think in addition to just the thing I said about debris earlier, like a tremendous number of injuries and casualties happen just as a result of going too fast and getting wrapped up in the moment. And this could be in any type of emergency, not even like a full-on, like, you know, community emergency, but just going through something personally, like losing your keys or whatever, you know what I mean?
I was just gonna say,
It's
yeah,
just
it
like,
happened to me right before, and my cell phone with it.
It's
and
like-
it had to be like,
and we were, sometimes it feels like there's a rush on, and sometimes there is, but like, you know, to whatever extent it's possible to take a couple of grounding breaths, like if you're not able to get that full breath and full exhale, then it might not be time to even act necessarily.
yeah, maybe that's a good time to talk about trauma and PTSD, right? So I feel like it's a topic of our time, trauma and PTSD. Many people here may identify as having experienced that or having PTSD. You may experience PTSD for the first time during a major disaster. That may be a trigger for things that had happened before, that, like me with the house fire when I was a kid or whatever. And I remember studying with Starhawk. She does a piece about trauma in groups that do make and the training that the fire department does is really similar. It's active listening, compassionate support to folks with making no assumptions and giving everyone that space. So some people may not talk when they're experiencing trauma. Some people may not stop talking. Attend to hempcrete needs. I attempted a joke. Do they have shoes on? Do they need water or food? Do they need more clothing or less clothing? Being there to listen, no advice giving, no God has a plan, no proselytizing or comments like that, just really grounded support. And so the fire department told us like 2 hours on and then you're off to take a break. I mean, you're doing this kind of active stuff where you're supporting traumatic folks, or you're doing search and rescue, or and so yeah, I think really taking that to heart. Again, so that you don't become a victim that they need to come rescue, that you can still remain one of the helpers. And you now when I see emergencies and I see them moving like slow a lot of the time, I really get it, you know.
I know, it's like there's someone injured in this building and they know it. You know, the responder, you know that there's someone injured in that building, and you're literally not going into the building until your buddy catches up with you and you say, I'm going into this building, you wait here, or even wait for two buddies and one person waits out here. And that's like, it seems slow sometimes, but like that's the way to do it, to not be another casualty, another person needing help.
And then also something that we should really rock, which is working collaboratively and flexibly and adaptively. When I trained the fire officers I trained with, they have us do an extensive scenario. You do like a 45-minute scenario. It is so draining. It's like, a trainer told me once, when you can smell your sweat, you know that? That's adrenaline. I thought that was very interesting. And then we did it, we debriefed, and then we did it again. And it was more about, in some cases, like people had different ideas about what to do and what roles they wanted to play. And one of the fire officers said, when we're in the field, we have to yield to each other. Like, we can't be arguing out in the field about which way to go. Like, in every fire is unique, right? And so they have to make decisions right there about how they're going to go. And so sometimes Nils leads, sometimes I lead, and you need to go with that. So that really working well together. Again, that's going to come from good relationships. And even if that's an annual barbecue that you start, or whatever it is, with your neighbors, and you throw a little, let's do a little emergency preparedness and exchange phone numbers, and, I looked at one thing in Marin County, and they had like a tip. You send out a tip every month to your group. It's something. right? Figuring out like where can we start so that it's not overwhelming to folks. So I think disaster first aid and trauma and let me just back up. I talked about trauma. Disaster first aid is different than regular first aid. Does that ring a bell to anybody? The saying, do the greatest good for the greatest number. So it's not like regular first aid. You're not going to do everything you can to save a life. This is kind of hard to hear, but the focus is not going to be on delivering CPR to somebody having a heart attack. It's going to be on triaging and then figuring out who is the walking wounded and can actually be put to work. You can have them helping. Who is too gravely harmed for you to be able to help them right now, and the people in the middle are those that you can help and are going to focus on helping. So again, it's doing the greatest good for the greatest number. It's a different orientation than regular first aid. It's similar to, if you ever have taken or want to take, wilderness first aid is a great thing to take, and also internationally there's something called Where There Is No Doctor.
Best book.
It's a book series. It's very cool. And so that's the idea with wilderness first aid, is that and that's defined as more than 1 hour from a hospital.
Right. So typical first aid, someone comes to you with a cut, and you're like, "Oh, let's get that cleaned up and get you a Band-Aid." Disaster first aid is like the classic situation is like, okay, you're on a bus and there's a bus crash, or you like pull over and see this bus had crashed, and like you kind of climb in the bus, and the first thing is like, if you can hear me, stand up. And then automatically the people who stand up, oh, you guys are my helpers. Even if you're like this, you're my helper, because if there's people who aren't getting up, that's who we're finding out. Who's dead. Okay, we'll come back to you later. You can tag. Basically, there's 3 different types of tags. Like critical, walking wounded, and dead.
Right. And like, EMS joke. If they're yelling, they're fine.
Right. If you can yell, you can breathe, and if you can breathe, you're
good. They've got an airway.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Right. No, that's perfect. So then we get the walking wounded, over here, and then if they're feeling like they're able to help, we're sorting out the people who didn't get up, and maybe someone is gashed really deeply with a broken leg or hip, and like we're gonna like move that person out together. Maybe we need to be treating this person for shock, and we're covering this person, getting person into a safe place, covering them with the blanket, and making sure that they stay awake. Want to jump in?
Yeah. The disaster first aid covers airway, breathing. It's ABC, airway, breathing, and circulation, which is shock. And those are really great things to know if you don't already. And then we would add learning how to stop bleeding.
Right.
And also, this is actually just a random jump over to kit, but building your own kit is really worthwhile, or being really careful to research. There might be some that are put together that are nicely done, whether that's first aid or other. But generally speaking, those, like these random kits, they're just putting anything in the kit. Some stuff they had left over from some other year or whatever. It's not, if it says FEMA recommended, that's a step in the right direction. But still the quality of what's in there might not be what you want. So really worthwhile and you might want to start small, I don't have everything that I would like to have. I don't even have as much water. That's a challenge that I would love to make space for questions like that, like nitty gritty, like how do we do this, Yeah.
Going over here.
Speaking of water, I should have mentioned in my intro, I'm more earthquake country, but that's more my direct concern. But when it comes to water, they say, you gotta have lots of water, but then the thing is, how do you make the water mobile if you're not able to stay, you have your earthquake preparedness kit in your home, but you end up having to evacuate. Do you guys have any comments on that, of how should you make water that's mobile, like just lots of little jugs?
Mm-hmm. So this is where I think a lot of backpacking, mountaineer, survival stuff, we've kind of like, it's converging. And so again, we don't want to be over reliant on gear, but we want to have a redundancy. So I do have, this is why I carry this stuff, right? I'm like a stuff carrier. I have water filtration. So that's another thing added because it's so small. I've got water filtration tablets with me now all the time. Just like I have water with me all the time. So that's one. Then there's a thing called the life straw, which is considered not that cool by people that kind of rate these things, but still it's $30 and it's very handy and portable.
Is that the UV treatment one, or the
you
one
can
that's
drink
filtered?
right out of the stream, or you can drink right out of water that has not been treated. And then there's the Sawyer and the mini Sawyer. There's some other water filtration systems. The straw isn't good because you just have to use it to drink. You can't process water. But a mini Sawyer would be a processing system. So I would think about things like that that would be portable. And again, having that redundancy so that you, and then there's again, you're not going to be able to take that many, but there's for like in a compact space, online there's water bricks, that's what they're called, and they stack and they hold 5 gallons each. It's just an option. The fire department recommends for, if you're stationary, not evacuating, a 55-gallon drum for water. That'd be good for a family of 4. But you have to change this out. So there's different ways of thinking about this. I have a friend who's like, no, I have my tablets, I'm ready to treat the water. But that's not the official thing you're supposed to say. She's the one who's got the water bricks. Huh?
If you're at home, the water might be turned off.
Yes. Right.
And
And then
Right.
remember
So she's
your
got,
toilet reservoir is your
Yeah.
friend.
that's right, and your hot water, not the
And your-
bowl,
right.
the tank, right?
Do you have any tips on how to source the drum? There's so many different resources out there. Like, you know, I have some friends who salvage restaurant kind of 55-gallon liquid supply drums and cut holes in it and that kind of thing. But wondering if you have more resources.
I was looking, there's some Southern California fire departments that have a recommendation on which drums. And actually, it was great. It was like some permaculture. Because I was looking like, where is permaculture combining with emergency preparedness? And this was one place. So I could take your name and find out if there's a specific brand that they recommended. Yeah, I think it definitely needs to be food grade, and you do want to be careful. You know, even if you're treating it with the pills, they're not magic. They don't do everything. Boiling is still the best in a lot of ways, but that's if you're conserving fuel, that might not be practical, or depending. But it depends. You know, right now in the flooding, our folks are without power for some days, right? Maybe some weeks. And there's that one city, Wilmington, is cut off, right? So, yeah, it might not be months, but it might be weeks. And then, you know, another thing that we're featuring in the handbooks, we're having like sections on water, waste, energy, where we give both the FEMA recommended and also kind of like, if you do nothing else, do this. You know, if I what's my quick and dirty if I can't deal with doing anything else right now. And then what are more regenerative approaches. And so in energy, we want to be talking about, again, we can draw on the mountaineering, solar charger, everything that you can take with you backpacking now, right? Absolutely, but solar cooking. Right, so again, integrate that into your life now, so you're not trying to learn how to use a solar cooker for the first time in a disaster. You know, have I done that yet? No, that's on my list, but I'm working. You know, I'm getting there.
Just like being simple, like recognizing the virtues of simplicity, like so we're not feeling like we're lacking or needing maybe as much.
Yes.
And, you know, because there's the immediate emergency, and obviously like adrenaline's pumping during probably the first like 72 hours of that, or however long things are crazy. But then there's like the ensuing weeks, like the next 3 to 6 weeks of like fallout. Maybe people are like unable to re-inhabit their houses, and maybe you're, you know, helping people out at a shelter, and maybe you're even living in one for a while. You don't know, or you know, staying with friends, you know, during a time of initial displacement. And then there's the many months of kind of recovery and rebuild, which is kind of still possibly going on right around here. But not being a person who's like feeling like we need quite so much. I mean, obviously we need water, some amount of food and shelter and community, but we don't need a bunch of other crazy stuff that people do think they need. So that makes us more resilient and able to bounce back.
I'm just wondering if, because I know we've been like talking, and I'm trying to kind of do a wide survey, wide swath of a lot of different information here. Just wondering if people have any additional comments or questions right now.
We could also, go ahead.
Just an observation, and it's not really waited till the end to say, but it just, you know, I live in a community not very far from here. We didn't end up having a wide-scale fire this year, but we had a lot of little small fires, and I could tell how scared people were in the community. As soon as smoke's up, it's like, what's going on? Fire came to our land, and we had to actually put it out and have via a neighbor. Anyway, I just what that clued me into in my own body, in my own nervous system, and watching it as as we experience more and more of this, the buildup of trauma, and just watching through the weeks, my capacity feel like sort of triggered over the course of the next week, and thinking about on a scale of a community when everyone's in that place of feeling kind of raw and sort of traumatized, how much it felt like to me like we need to all be sort of first responders, not in like just being able to do CPR, but to just support each other throughout weeks of experiencing fire season or flooding or whatever. How to imagine that we're just in a large scale breathing nervous system support team, you know, and on many levels. What are all the little needs that we just sort of do informally, but notice that people throughout an entire community are feeling on some level this fear and what that can do in family systems or school systems.
We need to, everything we do and make needs to be inclusive, and we need to think about everyone, including all vulnerabilities in our planning, and involve folks who experience those different vulnerabilities in the planning as much as possible. So I think that can't be emphasized enough. I really am seeing that where there's this, because historically, and still we have the legacy of this dominant culture writing this that excludes or marginalizes many people and voices, and that carries right into disaster planning. And so, two things, and I'm going to. One is, I was looking at, so in my research, one quote I heard that I really liked was for children, right? Because there's children everywhere when this is happening, right? We need to hold the space for them, right? So sometimes it sounds so smart, but when you are helping others, you're able to, is for children, the saying is find the helpers. That's what children can do, is find who's helping, who are the helpers, and go with them. But we want to be thinking about really, really inclusively how we're doing everything. And I know that's this word we're throwing around, but I'm purposely keeping it vague to encourage us to think about what it means for us. The only people that died in the North Bay fires were homebound seniors. So Map Your Neighborhood has centered getting to know your neighbors, sharing addresses. It's done in a coded way so that is this address if somebody found it. You know, people have different levels of concerns, but it's really thoughtful and it's what's needed. So thank you for that. And there's this, it is an organism at a at scale.
Just want to say I'm keeping a stack. I've got sister, brother, and brother.
Okay, great.
And then if there's time, I'd love to share the go bag thing, but we'll see what we can get through.
Just a quick point of clarification about what you said about make sure they're awake if they have trauma. People aren't supposed to
Well, if someone's suffering from shock. Specific shock, and that's like when your system is in shock. So she mentioned ABC, airway, breathing, and circulation. So if someone's non-responsive, first you're checking that their airway's not blocked, that they're literally not obstructed from breathing. Second, you're actually checking their breathing, listening for air moving in and out. And then circulation is checking that the capillary reflux thing. And if this is not turning red after you press it, but the person still is breathing, then we're treating for shock. It's like the person is, in danger of losing consciousness and ultimately even life. Like people die from that. So keeping that person awake is something to do. Like they would be ministered to in that way.
The disaster first aid that we mentioned earlier, there's those that are you don't have skills to help. They're in too grave a condition. And that could be folks with chronic conditions too. It may not, because things still go on. Life is happening. People are having babies and having accidents, but the emergency responders can't get there, right? So keeping that in mind as well.
I was just going to tag on to what you had mentioned about when there are small fires around you. That can be a really good opportunity to see how you react and how other people react. Just thinking back to a fire that happened near me last year around the time of the North Bay fires, and it was there's that tension that's high because it's how many of the resources are over there and then not here. And so it's like, you know, I saw the smoke and it was like, okay, where's the smoke coming from? And then, oh, I'm gonna go check in with the other person on the property. And it was amazing just how checking in with that other person was so grounding for both of us. And then it was also like, okay, let's start like, you know, thinking of what are the steps for how far away we are. One of them was just like standing there with a garden hose because there was ash landing nearby, and it's like, okay, I don't want that to hit this grass, you know. But it was more than anything, it was cool just to see like the internal process that happened in response to that. So those are really good opportunities to like observe yourself really and observe other people in your neighborhood.
Yeah, it can be super helpful to ground and check in with another person. And I'm just noting that we didn't get into the fire suppression bit too much. If you do CERT training, you'll be trained for several hours on first aid, and you'll do a lot of practice. If you don't want to do a whole weekend CERT, I do recommend like an evening, you know, Red Cross or some kind of first aid training, just to like be prepared to like do some CPR and stuff like that, because it's invaluable to know that. You could be the person just in a restaurant that's able to save a life, right? But you'll also learn basic fire suppression. If you've never used a fire extinguisher before, it's really helpful to just have a chance to practice using a fire extinguisher. Literally, like, how does this thing work? And you aim low and you swing it and spray it until the fire is out, and you want to be standing appropriate distance from the fire. So it's good to have a little bit of hands-on practice with this, and like you said, just like getting out the hose, right? If there's a fire nearby, getting things wet, great way to prevent your property from catching on fire for sure.
When I know one more. When I did the survey of different information, the American Red Cross, like there's 3 things are, have a kit, make a plan, be informed or stay informed. And so this idea, just to the point that you just made, of information is changing. You need to stay on top of. We learn from each disaster, and so just as you can learn from yourself and others' behavior and then build on that, work with that, the tips that we are citing and that are in, especially for earthquake, those go back to Northridge earthquake of '92, and each time it happens, same thing with flooding, they learn. So these tips really are based on real life situations. These are the specific things that we know now this would be good for people to do, and they're recommending. And then they're seeing, yes, we're seeing less people with cuts on their feet than we would have if we had not been teaching people to do that or whatever it is. So thank you for that. Yeah.
I wanted to reflect back what you were saying and some stuff that's come up that became evident for me over this last year, the recovery of Sonoma County, that even the professionals in the emergency response are starting to really talk about more. Mm-hmm. It's been somewhat taboo. It's this idea of collective mental health and like more community mental health. What happens when larger organizations go through trauma like this and going through like a whole heroic time and like it's very chaotic, and then the recovery and the depression, and in the mental health field there was really that aspect of collective mental health has been pushed back. But I sat in with this HOPE program, for instance. It was a mental health, social mental health after the fire, and they said no, they're really mapping this kind of stuff, even tracking the graph of what happens individually, because they see these individual cases come in of trauma, stress, PTSD, but collectively the community is also going through this stuff too. And a lot of it is privately, people go, what's going on? Is our society nuts? Well, a lot of people individually might say, but maybe there is an actual, situation happening that should be looked at or addressed, okay? And that's the collective insanity kind of thing. And it touches on a lot of other things besides disaster response too, if you really look at what's going on in our society right now.
Here's the book, A Paradise Built in Hell.
Yeah.
Cannot recommend it enough. Rebecca Solnit, who wrote Men Explain Things to Me, Mansplaining, and she wrote all manner of things. She's amazing. Yes?
I think this is really informative.
Thank you.
Being on a localized level and being able to be prepared for all this. curious what you guys have thought about kind of the macro view, because like I want to take advice and inherit some of the wisdom from elder traditions that have really been through a lot of these emergencies. You know, it might not be the fire, it might not be the flood. Maybe it's, you know, maybe the black moving forward. You know, the threat upon just the color of their skin, or the threat of logging in Brazil, or whatever it might be. How do you guys like relate this?
Yes, thank you for that. I actually be able to make sure to touch on some of this. I'm going to be a little bit Bay Area centric to make some references, but I think that it's precisely oppressed and marginalized communities that have done this kind of resilient work that in many ways that don't have to do with material goods have a lot of wisdom and so much to teach us, and that's both in the past and today, right now. So in Oakland, a group of African American women formed something called People's Community Medics. I did the same wilderness first aid training that they did, that had been adapted to the streets for protest if you're behind police lines and you can't get to help for first aid. And they did this because first aid is stopped from getting to gunshot victims. Police stopped them in Oakland, so they did that for their community. So it was really about, right, not DIY, DIT, do it together. Let's figure out what we need to do. And I think there's other really, really good examples. There's other, in terms of what both of you were touching on, like what are some of the tools we can use? EFT, they're all acronyms. EFT, which is emotional freedom technique, TRE, which is another body-based. Some of these are being taught in huge, like in Thailand, I think, in huge, like 5,000 people at the same time are all learning it because the community needs it. So there's this recognition. Let us get these tools out let's share them, let's dispense them. Here in the West, sometimes you need a certification or somebody has to have liability insurance or whatever, but there's a recognition we need to get these tools out to the people. So I think radical mental health would be another example that I'm involved in, where we're doing work all the time to create support groups and other spaces that are for people who feel oppressed by the dominant mental health system. And then that's going to be really helpful both in times of crisis, but also as a model. So I don't know that it speaks to it all, but I feel like, right, like it's probably being said all over this convergence, but fire alone, right, there's the Native Americans local to the West did controlled burns and handled fire in a whole different way, and we have stopped doing that to our peril. And that would be just one massive example, but I think there's many examples, and I feel like you are calling out and connecting some of the dots that, it's hard for us to get to in an hour, so thank you.
So just a call that, sometimes I feel like, oh yeah, I'm encouraging people to do like this extra training that it's usually like, free or like $50 or whatever, or to assemble a go bag, and like all of that implies a certain amount of privilege too, and even like a time privilege, like even if you are like of like a middle class whatever, like I feel like a lot of time stress on a lot of the people in my life that I know, like it would be like an undue burden to even like get away for an evening to like make this kind of plan, and that just makes me want to put a word to creating systems of overall economic equality and social justice and all of that creating a paradigm of social justice and equality ultimately leads toward more preparation for whatever life has in store for us.
How much does a full cert training typically cost?
It depends.
It's free.
I think I paid $50 for the one in Marin, and they give you a bag and a helmet and all these.
And usually it doesn't cost anything at all. Yeah, it's free. It's the fire department they want citizens to do it. Just do it, and
you become their team. You become their first responders, and then when stuff goes down, you're holding it down on the block until they arrive. You're doing the triage and starting the search and rescue.
I just wanted to add to, for those in the Bay Area, or actually in Oakland, it's called
Core. Yes.
Citizens of Oakland respond to
It's
emergency.
the same thing.
And
Sorry.
it's
Thank you
NERT
for
in San
correcting me.
Francisco. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's different.
Well, I think it's specific to Oakland, but yeah, so it's great.
Yep, and in San Francisco it's called NERT,
neighborhood.
but it's usually CERT, and this is a national manual, and then they adapt them. So,
and we've got a bunch of resources. Like, you know, when we wrap, feel free to play with these books. I want to just super quick touch on the go bag, and you can we can pass these around if you want to take a picture of this sheet.
Oh yeah.
Or we can
Good
email
idea.
it to you. But just a quick brainstorm. Like, what do you think you would need to have? You know, for your go bag for a week. What would be helpful to have in your bag? What's that?
Bandages.
Bandages,
Yeah.
sure. First aid kit.
Scissors.
Knife.
A mirror.
For signaling?
Yeah.
Great. I mean, a compass with a mirror on it even while you're at it, but yeah, totally.
Tweezers.
Tweezers? Okay.
Something I've been thinking of is like money. Where do I put my money? Could I find a hiding spot in my car to put it? Because, you know, bank machines aren't going to work, and, you know, you might need to get on the road.
It is recommended to have money, you know, if you could, you know, $40 is plenty, but, you know, a couple $100 in small denominations, you know, ready to go in a little envelope. I got it in the bag here. Yeah.
And also the idea of having, right, we talked about the little stuff under the bed, and then having, if you have a car, having a car kit as well as something at home. And so you might have some in both places, and it might or may not be with you, as well as some on you.
So money, and some people might not think about this, but, you know, your life documents or copies of your life documents, maybe a copy of your passport, a copy of, you know, your kid's birth certificate or whatever, just basic things like that.
In a fireproof safe.
Yeah, and you know,
that's interesting, yeah.
the American Red Cross now is recommending to use this plastic sheet and then put it in your freezer, because they often survive all sorts of, they don't survive everything, but this is, you know, in earthquake country at least, they recommend that. Yeah, I think that one of the things in Rebecca Solnit's book, she talks about, there's a sociologist that, I mean, it's meticulously researched. She draws on anybody who has looked at this, that there's these stories or narratives about mass panic that are not always but she said that a sociologist flipped it on its head and said, actually, it's a small group of elites panicking that then sometimes make decisions and have control over things that have things play out differently for the masses. And this is dramatically and incredibly true with the San Francisco earthquake. I learned so much when I read this. These misguided military held back actually, it's happened in more recent fires where citizens want to go in and try to rescue people or fight fires, and then they're held back. You know, and sometimes I think those are the right decisions, and sometimes I don't. You know, because there's situations where people don't. They jump in and save the person. We don't say you shouldn't have done that. So, you know, you make split-second decisions all the time, and yeah, I have a really positive view of. Hopeful, I don't know. Rebecca Solnit feels like hope is not this like loose word. It's like you don't know. It's like you can be open to what's possible. And so just coming to it with a really open heart of service. You know, how can I be helpful?
I'll share my paradise and hell parable on the way out. Maybe I'll send this around real quick while we're still in circle if you just want to have a look at it. It is, and you can take a picture of it with your phone if you got it. But you know, you want to have some means of starting a fire, right? That's helpful to have like a lighter or something like that. It's good to have an N95 dust mask. You never know if there's going to be, you know, air that's not breathable. You don't need to get a fancy schmancy gas mask. Great if you have one, but just a little N95 is helpful. Maps can be good too. You know, we might not have cell phone network access, so maps are helpful. Basic toiletry stuff. You want to have 4 days of food, a few days of water. I'll send this around. There's more. But I think we did actually touch on a lot of it.
And
did everybody get a chance to look at this?
There's variations too. We don't have copies, but we've got single sheets that we're setting out here if you want to snap photos of them, or we'll have a sign-in sheet, sign-up sheet. We'd love to get your name and email. We'll let you know about the handbook, and when we're doing more, we'd love to create like more of a community where we can be dialoguing about this and supporting each other.
Yeah, please track the Ready Together handbook. And if you signed up, we'll be sure to send you info about that. And I guess my outro piece on the Paradise and Hell is just something that happened, again, in the wake of this valley fire in Lake County. So I ended up being displaced from my home. I was out in the field for weeks, and we were doing this work on the radio and like getting resources where they needed to go. People were filling up these relief centers, you know, evacuees staying in tents, little tent cities around the local granges and moose lodges and stuff like that. And they would be calling up saying, oh, you know, we got a bunch of horses down here at the moose lodge that need feed. And we'd say that out on the radio, and then someone would say, oh, I'm on my way with the truckload of feed for the horses. All right, getting needs met in that way. It was really sweet. And one night, the Moose Lodge was one of the biggest sort of relief centers. There was 300 evacuees camped out there. And me and my buddies came in and brought like a live concert. It was like night 3 of the fire. The fire was still going, but we brought the reggae band in, and like, you know, the people needed like some release. Actually, you know, people who had lost their homes were like dancing probably freer than any, even last night to DJ Dragonfly. Like there was like, people were letting loose stomping, because we need all sorts of, you know, relief. And that includes, you know, children still being able to play and color and feel like things are okay. But I talked with a rancher that night. He was like a hard dude, you know, like a get her done country dude, who was like, you know, guy with the big truck kind of guy. And his name was Douglas, and he was talking to me about his experience evacuating and how the fire came over the hill, and he had minutes to get out of the house with his wife, and his house burned down and his son's house burned down, and he had 180 head of cattle. And you know, he was like, this guy was, again, like a big strong dude who was like crying while telling me this. He's like, and I got to go check on my cows like 2 days later, you know, yesterday. I got to go see my cows, and like, I was worried that they were all going to be dead, but they survived by getting in the pond. And all 180 of them got into this little pond that they barely fit in and stayed wet and survived. And the best part is, he said, when I went to feed them, he's like, usually when I go feed the cows, you know, there's the alphas that are knocking the little ones aside, like the big bullies that are like, nah, you know, like the little ones are outside like, can I get some? The big ones are like, nah, not right now, I'm eating. But this time, he said, when I go to feed these cows, like, they just filed in so zen-like and sweet, and the big ones made sure the little ones got to go first. And I felt like this paradise built in hell, I mean, that's also in human nature. Like during these times of crisis, it doesn't matter what religion you are, what political party you are, what language you speak, like we all need food, we all need water, shelter, medicine, and we find a way to come together. And I think one of the tricks is to remember after the fire, or if the flood or whatever, if we've never actually experienced it, or if it's a year later, to remember that this is all, everybody in the community, our comrades, our family, our tribe, and that we got to find a way to make it together. So yeah, we started 15 minutes late, we ended 20 minutes late. If you have any stuff you want to discuss with us, we can kind of keep wrapping, but I want to formally close to honor everybody's time. Yep. Please come sign up if you're interested in more info. Snap some shots of these resources we have, and we're glad to talk with you more. Yeah. Thanks for showing up, guys.